Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Jason Dutch. Notably absent today, am I, as dad duties popped in. So, want to thank Chris Jones for joining the first half of the show. But we'll get right into today's dig with special guest Jessica Burbank from the Young Turks network, another friend from there, which is awesome. So, we'll get right into this and rock and roll from there. And after I'm done, my co-host, generally co-host, because I'm usually sitting next to them, um, will give their commentary on this. So let's roll in, shall we? I like to do this so I can tell the dad jokes. Mikey loves my dad jokes. So my 8th grade social studies teacher taught me things that turns out after doing my own research wasn't exactly the whole story. And this week, we will dive into the topic of American interventionism, the CIA, and Iran-Contra. So the U.S. has had a long history of intervention in other nations since successfully gaining independence, which is sort of ironic, noting, the isolationist ideas that permeated the nation after the revolution. The U.S. had pretty much from the start been against any European powers having influence in the Americas, established officially with the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. But almost immediately after the Revolutionary War, started intervening in Asia. This all started with Korea in around 1811, and later in Japan and throughout really the entire 19th century. So in those Asian efforts, by the way, I should note, were sort of efforts to westernize Asia in order to be able to trade with them. And, they were also very isolationist prior. So we fought in the Philippine Wars around this time. We fought in the Barbary Wars with the barbarians, actually off the coast of Africa. Fought in the Banana Wars, which kind of wish we lost because I freaking hate bananas. We intervened in Chile, which I do like chili. Chili's pretty good, better than bananas. And then after Chile, dozens of occupations in Latin American nations, most notably making Cuba a protectorate, actually kind of ran it for a couple of years. And we literally had United States Marines ruling the Dominican Republic from around 1915-16 to the mid-1920s. And in addition to that, we also, just for the heck of it, set up an African nation in Liberia. Not to be confused with Latvia, where Dr. Doom is from, for those who are wondering. So not all of this was military, though. So as President Taft initiated what was called dollar diplomacy in 1914, which was basically a way for American corporations, of course, to benefit while assisting the national security goal of preventing the European powers from filling any possible power vacuums in Latin America. Sounds oddly like socialism there, but yeah, it's for corporations. So, of course, socialism for corporations is completely okay. So, if you don't already know, interventionism in the U.S. is done for one primary reason: not to promote our form of democracy, as I have yet to see any of the democracies that we've set up have an electoral college, not to quell terrorism. No, we actively support terror groups and they fight proxy wars for us. So, and also, sorry, Christians, but also not to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ either. Now, that was the Roman Catholic Church did that, but we didn't. We did use it as an excuse sometimes, but that wasn't the reason. No, the reason why we did all this was one reason only: to pave the way for capitalism. To pave the way, not just for capitalism, but the people participating in capitalism, the U.S. corporations. We wanted to increase access for these corporations to new resources and new people to both produce and consume goods. And if you think that's not true, well, you're just really not paying attention. So the CIA was essentially founded in on July 26, 1947. Yes, this very week. By Harry Truman, who oddly is often noted as being one of the most progressive presidents in U.S. history. when he signed off on the National Security Act, specifically in Section 104, which was all done in the wake of Pearl Harbor. So officially speaking, the CIA is concerned with issues such as terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, spying, and more recently, cybersecurity. The CIA has been involved in far too many operations to discuss in one show. That goes without saying. In fact, probably do a year of shows. But I will nonetheless attempt to give you a good tidbit here from 30,000 feet. So the CIA is probably known most in pop culture as a spy organization that is fighting communism, at least up until recently, and socialism, of course, which is a trigger word for everything. But they've been involved in quite a few coups that really have nothing to do with communism, including the Iranian coup that we spent some time talking about a couple of weeks back. An attempted coup in Indonesia, of all places, Vietnam, they were involved in a whole shit ton of arming rebel forces in places where we decided it makes sense for national security, because, you know, nobody proxy wars like the good old US of A, except maybe Russia, because we fought against them most of those times, who, by the way, has their own version of the CIA, essentially, in the FSB, but it's a damn close race. The CIA claims not to monitor U.S. citizens, it should be noted, unless they are suspected of terrorist activity, which is kind of gray. And of course, if you're suspected of being from the moons of Jupiter, which is, of course, every person on the show, yes, they're probably spying us right now. The CIA should not be confused with the FBI. They're different. And there are three main ways to distinguish those two organizations. So CIA agents always wear gray suits, where FBI agents always wear blue suits. Got it? So CIA employees actually comb their hair. They're really good looking like me. FBI agents kind of look like Mikey, you know, a little disheveled. And most importantly, you can tell a CIA agent by the fact that they are not inspecting female bodies all day like the FBI is. Get it? FBI, female body inspector, hardy har. Anyway, so let's talk about a few fun stories before we get to the big tamale in Iran-Contra. So one, in 1950, the UFO craze was pretty real. So real that the CIA and Air Force actually tried to create flying saucers shaped like saucers. They wanted to be able to destroy Russian targets while being able to blame this on the aliens. Oh boy, here we go. Probably those aforementioned Jupiterians like us, right? So unfortunately, despite massive funding, there was nobody big enough to throw the Frisbee. Number two, MK Ultra, which is, of course, the newest version of Mortal Kombat. This was a 20-year attempt at mind control. Like, I think Wizzo was part of this on the Bozo show. What a creepy guy that was. MK Ultra wasted more resources than we can really count. And all they really had to do was go talk to Yoda, and they would have been just fine. This is not the podcast you're looking for. I'm going to do this when I go on to Young Turks. This is not the podcast you're looking for. You're looking for Dig on America. So number three, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which, by the way, we already had a bunch of nukes on Russia's doorstep, so it kind of makes sense they'd want them here. The CIA brought a plan to President John F. Kennedy, which would carry out a series of terrorist attacks. Not on Cuba, not on Russia, but here. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation against American citizens that originated within the Department of Defense in 1962 or thereabouts. The proposals called for CIA operatives to both stage and actually commit acts of terrorism against American military and civilian targets, blaming them on the Cuban government and using it to justify a war against Cuba. The plan there in Operation Northwoods called for assassinations of Cuban Americans, bombing a restaurant in Washington, D.C., inciting riots in certain cities. I'm sure you can guess the demographics of those cities, and hijacking airplanes, of course, which is like 101. Now, happily, JFK did reject this plan, although just a year earlier, he did sign off on Operation Mongoose, which was basically the same thing, but taking place in Cuba, and most famous for failing time after time after time after time to kill Fidel Castro, including using an ex-girlfriend who fell back in love with him and an exploding cigar. Haas, pay attention. Exploding cigar, be careful. There was also a plan called Operation Dirty Trick, another false flag, which was a contingency in case the Mercury manned space mission were to have failed, crashed, etc. Now, this was the orbit around the Earth with astronaut John Glenn. And the idea was, and this is a quote, the objective here is to provide irrevocable proof that should Mercury fail, the fault would lie with the communists. What a perfect whipped topping for your Red Scare cupcake. Number 4, Operation Paperclip. This one is simple. Instead of imprisoning Nazis, we move the Nazis to sunny California and we give them new identities. We clear their name and we find work for them, finding ways to kill people as effectively as the Nazis had done so. This included Werner von Braun, who basically helped establish the United States space program. It was big in the Apollo missions. Number 5, Attorney Anna. This one is for you. Hope you're here. It proves what we've talked about before, that birds are not real. So the CIA had originally tried to use cats as spies. That didn't work. Get hit by cars. So the CIA used our feathered robot friends, the pigeon and the raven. I'm not sure if it's the raven from the novel or the raven from Game of Thrones, but one of the two. The CIA trained pigeons to drop sensors and fly cameras all over Eastern Europe and employed thousands of birds. I don't know if they gave them healthcare or not. And they likely continue this operation at some point in time today. They would use like lasers to get them to go to windows and all types of crazy stuff. Not really ever sure what they got from it, but hey, you know, you just use those GPS and you're good. These birds are not real. And by the way, more birds. Operation Mockingbird in the 70s was a backdoor deal with the U.S. newspaper to publish CIA authored or approved articles that really just were culture wars meant to make people fear Russia or socialism. By the way, QAnon believes that Operation Mockingbird still exists today, and if they are possibly right about anything, which they're probably not, but if they are right about one thing, it might be this. Definitely higher chance of this than the reptilian aliens or the space lasers. Oh, the Jewish space lasers, sorry. In the 1980s, the CIA under Ronald Reagan was busy funding commie fighters across the world, but Reagan was most interested in a group called the Contras and their battle in, Mikey, I get to say it, Nicaragua, against the Cuban-backed Sandinistas. Oddly, Reagan loved the Contras so much, he actually called them, and this is a quote, the moral equivalent of our founding fathers, which is absurd because the Contras were funded heavily by the cocaine trade, which is, of course, probably far more moral than the slavery the founding fathers were building the United States with. But anyway, Congress passed the Boland legislation to keep the CIA and the DOD from funding these drug dealers. Unswayed by this, Reagan directed his national security chief, Bud McFarlane, to fund the Contras regardless of any cost. Enter Iran. In 1985, an Iranian terror group held American hostages in Lebanon, which I am sadly old enough to remember the news coverage of. Reagan rightly, of course, wanted to bring them home, as did all of America. We were all polarized by this, but it was how he did it that almost cost him his presidency. And by almost, I mean not even close. So despite a trade embargo with Iran, which I believe was Carter, and a pledge not to negotiate, that the U.S. would never negotiate with terrorists, right? We've all heard that before. Reagan gave the Iranians about $30 million in weapons and cash to free these hostages. But secretly, only about half, maybe 12 million of that money actually went to Iran. So you remember they said Obama dropped pallets of cash in Iran? Well, Reagan dropped pallets of cash in Iran, literally, but also some of it didn't go to Iran. It went to, guess who? The Contras. And we found all this out, during the Senate hearings in 1987. Oliver North was a big piece of this, his admissions and testimony. So there's a lot of great resources to go back and look at this on YouTube and stuff like that. So despite the efforts of John Kerry and others, Reagan got away with this, and he was not ever implicated directly, but many around him, including McFarland and North, were found guilty. Forward to August 1996, the San Jose Mercury News finally linked the origins of crack cocaine in California to those Contras. The same guerrilla force backed by the Reagan administration, in addition to aiding Manuel Noriega, a Panamanian leader who was in bed with Colombian drug lords and running drugs into America's inner cities. Again, guess the demographics, because he was no fan of the Sandinistas, he being Noriega. Or was he? Because U.S. eventually did invade Panama and take down Noriega, but not till they found out that he was providing intelligence and services to the Sandinistas. So I guess he was a dirty commie, and then they took him out. So now that's not it. There was other guys too that were running these drugs, and I do want to make sure we touch on this briefly, because even though it's not direct CIA all the time, this one is Jose Bueso Rosa, a Honduran general who was heavily involved with the CIA's Contra operations, faced a trial for his role in a massive drug shipment to the U.S. Reagan officials got him a sentence at a posh resort posing as a prison in Florida. Again, better to be a drug runner than a communist, I suppose. According to the Institute for Policy Studies, while much of the CIA Contra drug story had been revealed back in the 80s, during the congressional hearings, the Mercury News break in the 90s added a bunch of missing links like the ones that I just talked about. So it followed the cocaine trail all the way to Ricky Ross and some Los Angeles gangs, of course, again, guess the demographics, who became street-level distributors of crack. The CIA's drug network, wrote Webb, who was the author of the article who broke the story, quote, opened the first pipeline between cartels and black neighborhoods of Los Angeles, which became known as the crack capital of the world. These gangs used their profits to buy automatic weapons, sometimes from CIA-linked drug dealers. The CIA has denied this, of course, but the fact is the war on drugs, which was oddly also like this big Reagan thing, war on crime, war on drugs, resulted in black Americans having the most resulted in black Americans moving from having the most fathers present in the house in the home, so in other words, the most two-parent families, to the least within about a decade and a half. Interesting. Nonetheless, the Iran-Contra hearings were, along with Watergate and Benghazi, the most watched congressional hearings up until, well, now with the January 6 hearings. So a lot of information there. Again, 30,000 foot view. I just want to touch on a few things, get a little bit of historical fact thrown in there. If you like this show, follow us on Twitter at Dig on America. Definitely subscribe on Twitch or YouTube, preferably Twitch at twitch.tv/Dig on America. Follow us on Twitter. I already said that. And if you'd like to donate to the show, patreon.com/Dig on America. I'll let my guys and Jessica rock and roll with this. Thanks for having me. Bye. Bye. I miss you. I love you. Bye.